We need to talk about open weight AI models and why almost all commentary I'm seeing is getting so many things wrong. In this video, we're going to talk about what open weight models are, how they differ from the closed source models, and why we might want to think really carefully about what sort of rules and regulations we try and put on top of open weight models in some sort of quest to make something that is already pretty unsafe, safer and palatable to how we think technology should work. Over the last few weeks, there's been a number of cybersecurity incidents relating to AI, and that's where I think we need to start. So OpenAI had an issue where one of their models allegedly got into Hugging Face's systems because it was trying to run a benchmark called Exploit Gym and thought that the answers would be sitting inside their data. And because it was working towards goal maximization and figuring out how to finish that goal of completing Exploit Gym bench, what ended up happening is it figured out a way to get out of OpenAI's system, find another system to jump off, and then land an attack on Hugging Face. Now, we don't know every single specific detail here, so there's a lot of allegations, and until we see the absolute full technical logs from both sides, we might never know exactly how this all worked. And it's an evolving story, so I'll let other people be across the details there. But the key point is this. Hugging Face couldn't actually use the OpenAI or Anthropic models to help them. In the midst of a cybersecurity incident, they had to rely on their own locally hosted GLM 5.2, a Chinese open weight model, to help them do things like log analysis and inspecting things and all this sort of stuff to help plan and run their cybersecurity incident defense. Now, the whole drama around the Anthropic export controls was about greater cyber capability in models and how you needed restrictions so that bad actors or threat actors couldn't just use the open weight models or closed models alike to do bad cyber stuff. I know technical cybersecurity people just roast me in the comments. I know it's more technical than that. What happens when you restrict the defenders from using models like this is bad actors who just fine-tune their own open weight models for specific attack types potentially have an advantage, because if you're in the middle of a cybersecurity incident, you cannot afford to suddenly get safety classified down to a dumber model. If you're safety classified down to a dumber model and you're running the cyber defense at a hospital or a bank or whatever, do you really think that anyone in society is going to care about AI safety risks if your safety classifier enabled some sort of attack which stole patient data or led to some sort of really bad banking scandal? No one's going to care. And this is one thing to understand the current positioning and benchmark capability of the models. OpenAI, Anthropic, they're really good. They make really good models. We have Fable, we have GPT 5.6 Sol, and we also have, with the recent price cuts that OpenAI have done on their Terra and Luna models on the Pareto frontier for Western labs only, they are very competitive. Sonnet 5 is kind of not that great, but the Luna and Terra models on higher reasoning levels are pretty good. But again, like if you wanted to use these in cyber defense, even if you go through the OpenAI Trusted for Cyber access programs, there's no guarantee it's just going to work. And this is a real problem because in cybersecurity, everything must work. You cannot have things that will randomly throw you to a dumb model because you're trying to do something like inspect some edge case thing that looks like doing a risky cyber thing. You just can't have that happen. And what's happened in the open weight model space around the same time as all of this has been happening is Kimi K3 has been released, DeepSeek V4 Flash, a July 31st cut with much higher agentic performance has been released, and that's much cheaper as well. You also have the release of Qwen 3.8 Max, which is already a really good performing model. And all of these open weight models have two potential uses, good and bad. You can use them to start fine-tuning your own cyber defense model. You can use them to run cyber defense yourself in incident response. You're not going to run into a safety classifier if you're running some of these systems on your own machines. And this is something where, when we think about the wider economics of how do you make money as an AI frontier lab, this is where the trade-off between safety and earning an economic return comes in. Because if you start getting regulation that tells you you have to safety classify a lot of use cases and some of the most valuable uses, what could be more valuable than running a near real-time cyber incident response with the help of the best frontier AI models? If you can't do that reliably every time without any risk of being downgraded to a dumber model, why would you pay a premium to be a customer of that tool? You're not going to. And a lot of chief information security officer people and people sitting on boards of companies are going to be, wait a minute, well, if we're paying OpenAI and Anthropic all this money, why don't we spend a few million just to fine fine-tune a few local models for our own purposes, so in the event of an attack, we don't have to rely on these external API endpoints to help us. And that line of thinking is just going to get more and more common over the next few months, because the more cyber incidents we have, the more fearful companies are going to be of being victim of one. We already know that a lot of companies have paid lip service to cybersecurity over the last few years. There are still constant privacy and data breaches, cyber breaches, all this sort of stuff. It's effectively a hardening exercise which has proceeded at pace in some sectors, but unless there's been a regulator pushing it, most businesses are still nowhere near secure enough. And ironically, as all these open weight models get more widely distributed, a lot of bad actors are going to be able to have easy pickings where they're going to be able to go and scan and identify companies which have not been taking cybersecurity precautions. And they're going to be able to essentially use the leverage of these AI tools to run more complicated attacks faster, get away with things which would be very hard to do against a better defended and more secured company, but also do it at a pace which there really isn't a regulatory or law enforcement response that can cope. Already over the last decade or so, the explosion of fraud, scams, cyber, everything essentially has been very hard for both defenders and law enforcement and the judicial system to cope with. The incentives for someone in a lower wage economy to become a script kiddie with the help of AI to systematically take out weaker companies in the West, hold their stuff to ransom and all this sort of thing, that incentive is getting higher and higher. And if the entry bar is getting lower, then unless there's a commensurate investment in the hardening of literally everything from a cybersecurity perspective, well, all we're going to see is more and more attacks. And with more and more attacks, there's going to be more and more demands for some sort of regulation on open weight models. You can already see that the frontier labs themselves think it's unsafe for you and me to have access to these open weight models. This is also very commercially convenient. But as we've already learned, without access to those open weight models, if you're a cybersecurity defender, how do you fight fire with fire? If your attackers are using fine-tuned open weight models that are at a level of performance equal or even higher than some of the frontier models themselves, well, what's your defense mechanism? You need to maintain an ever-escalating capability that progresses in line with the capability of the best open weight and the best frontier models. We're in an arms race around cyber risk for AI models, and one thing I did not expect this to happen so soon, but you can start to see it happening is a lot of people in the national security side of things are figuring this out and realizing, wait a minute, do we need to ban this, ban this, ban this? And realizing, well, if they actually ban all that stuff, you're not actually improving the safety and security of your system, because when you think about regulation, there's always going to be use cases that you didn't think of. When you think about safety classifiers, where a model looks at what you're trying to get it to do and figure out if it's an acceptable or not acceptable use, there are always going to be things that go wrong. And in the heat of the moment, if you have to speak magic incantations to your OpenAI or Anthropic API endpoint so that you don't accidentally get safety classified and blocked when you're trying to respond to a cyber incident, well, you're not really going to build those tools into your cyber incident response plan, are you? So there's a real conundrum that we're going to see over the next few months, and where it all lands is something that I'm still unclear on. But I want to be thinking and talking a little bit more about stuff like this on this channel. If you're interested in this, hit the like and subscribe. Drop a comment below. What sort of cyber risks do you see from open weight models? Do you think we can regulate or ban them? Do you think that the trade-offs are worth it? How do you think about this? Let me know. Drop a comment below, and I'll see you in the next video.